Separation of church and state is not separation of truth and state. The very fact that this statement needs to be made, and it does need to be made, reflects how different our cultural climate is compared to when the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was signed in 1791. While many people are familiar with the phrase separation of church and state, few people understand its origin or true meaning. As I see it, the knowledge gap between the apparent meaning of these words and their actual meaning is being exploited to manipulate Christians and keep them from meddling in public policy, particularly when policy relates to social issues like abortion, so-called same-sex marriage, immigration, gun rights, race relations, gender identity, voting rights, etc. What do we actually know about the separation of church and state, besides that the concept has been around for a long time and that it's widely accepted? We know that when an idea has stood the test of time, it's because it is often seen as being true. After all, few concepts reach broad acceptance, and even fewer are passed down from generation to generation. Additionally, the phrase separation of church and state has the benefit of appearing to be self-explanatory, which increases its rhetorical value. When people think they understand something, they don't feel the need to question its meaning. When you put the pieces together, it's not hard to see why calling for the separation of church and state has been an effective strategy for discouraging Christians from getting involved in politics. Why should a Christian stay out of politics? Because the church should be separate from the state, right? But where does the phrase actually come from, and how might its original context inform us of its true meaning? The concept of separation of church and state emerged from the historical, political, and religious contexts of 17th and 18th century Europe and America. Leading up to the founding of the United States, Europe was largely defined by state-sanctioned religion. In countries like England, Spain, France, and parts of Germany, official state churches were the norm, whether it was the Anglican Church in England, the Catholic Church in Spain and France, or the Lutheran Church in parts of Germany. Clergy often collaborated with state authorities to ensure religious conformity. To the surprise of nobody, this resulted in the coercion and persecution of religious minorities. Some groups, however, like the English Puritans, were unwilling to comply with government-given mandates when they conflicted with God-given mandates, choosing instead to flee to the New World in favor of religious freedom. The actual phrase, separation of church and state, originates from a letter written by Thomas Jefferson, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence and the third president of the United States. In 1801, Jefferson received a letter from the Danbury Baptist Association, a group of 23 churches in Connecticut and 3 in New York. The letter expressed the association's concern over vague language in their state constitution, which potentially left the door open for the government to interfere with their religious freedom. In his 1802 reply, Jefferson reassured the churches that the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was effectively a wall of separation between church and state. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution says, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." The historical context makes it clear where Jefferson stood on the matter and what the First Amendment had in view. The idea of a separation between the church and the state is simply that the government has no authority to establish a national religion or interfere with the religious freedom of the people. Morality lies at the heart of many of today's social issues. What is right? What is wrong? What is good? What is evil? What is love? What is hate? The essential debate within our culture revolves around whether morality is subjective or objective. If morality is subjective, then judgments of right and wrong are based solely on personal preferences. However, if morality is objective, then truth exists independently of individual beliefs or opinions. I think it's fair to say that those leading the charge for the separation of church and state are usually the same people who overestimate the value of personal experience, believing that a person's lived experience has supreme value and should, therefore, be given voice without fear of judgment or risk of being declared invalid by anyone. This is basically what people mean when they say, "Speak your truth." Don't get me wrong. I understand that life can be hard. Life isn't fair. That's one of the things my parents taught me before they divorced when I was in junior high. Talk about difficult. We should all make an effort to understand where others are coming from and what experiences have shaped their convictions. However, we also need to recognize that there are some boundaries that should not be crossed, no matter how strongly someone feels. Truth is not subjective. Truth is, in fact, objective, and it comes from God. While moral truth may not always be immediately clear or easy to discern, that doesn't make it relative to individual experience. Objective truth transcends personal perspective, and denying the truth over a long period of time will inevitably lead to a total breakdown of society. As radical as this may seem to some people, it wasn't radical to the people who founded our nation. They understood that God has written certain truths on our hearts. For our sake, these truths are written in the Bible, too. That doesn't make them subjective, it makes them clear. Take lying, stealing, and cheating, for example. Why do we all agree that these things are wrong? Why do we teach our kids that it's wrong to lie? Why do we discipline them when they fall short of God's standard that we must tell the truth? Why do we agree that shoplifters should be prosecuted for stealing? Why do we reprimand students for cheating on a test or suspend them for fighting? You get the point. We agree on these things because we intuitively know that truth is objective. To one degree or another, the truth is in us, but it doesn't come from us. Truth comes from God alone. As our society continues to be driven by moral subjectivism, Christians need to stand firm by upholding objective truth, as revealed by God, for the good of all people, in all places, at all times.